The mud-slicked streets of Pine Ridge glistened in the aftermath of the spring rains, reflecting the glow of oil lamps from the town's few buildings still lit at this late hour. One of these was the sheriff's office, where Eliza Morgan stood, with trembling hands as Sheriff Nathaniel Hayes circled her like a vulture eyeing its prey. "Your father's debt comes due tomorrow, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice carrying the false warmth that made him all the more dangerous. "I've been patient, more patient than most would be." He stopped in front of her, tilting her chin up with one finger. "But my patience has limits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Eliza pulled away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We'll find a way to pay. The store is failing, and we both know it." The sheriff's smile never reached his eyes. "But I've been thinking, there's another way to settle what's owed." When he laid out his proposal, marriage in exchange for forgiveness of her father's debt, Eliza felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Marriage to the man who ruled Pine Ridge with fear, masked as law and order, the man whose hands were stained with blood he called justice. "I'll give you until sundown tomorrow to decide," he said, opening the door. "Though we both know there's only one choice that keeps your father out of a prison cell." Eliza stumbled into the rain-soaked night, her world collapsing around her. What she didn't see were the dark eyes watching from the shadows across the street. Eyes that belonged to a man the townsfolk only knew as River, a Cherokee healer whose people had been driven into the mountains by men like Sheriff Hayes. And she couldn't have known that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. Pine Ridge, Tennessee, had once been a place of promise. Nestled in the valley of the Smoky Mountains, the town had survived the war with most of its buildings intact, if not its spirit. The year was 1876, and while other parts of the nation looked forward to the centennial celebrations, Pine Ridge remained trapped in the grip of the past, and in the iron fist of Sheriff Nathaniel Hayes. Sheriff Hayes had arrived 3 years after the war ended, a former Confederate captain with a silver star and a silver tongue. He spoke of order and protection in a time when both were in short supply. What the townsfolk didn't realize until it was too late was the price they would pay for his particular brand of security. For Eliza Morgan, that price now seemed impossibly high. The Morgan General Store had been a fixture in Pine Ridge since before Eliza was born. Her father, Samuel Morgan, had built it with his own hands, expanding it over the years until it stood as the largest building on Main Street save for the church. But the war had changed everything. With half the men in the county dead or maimed and money scarce, the store that had once supported 3 families now barely kept the Morgans fed. Eliza pushed open the door to the store, the familiar bell jingling overhead. Her father looked up from his ledger, his face pale in the lamplight. "You're back late," Samuel said, his voice carrying the permanent tiredness that had become as much a part of him as his graying hair. "Did you manage to speak with Hayes about an extension?" Eliza removed her wet shawl, hanging it by the door, before meeting her father's hopeful gaze. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until she had figured out another way. "He's considering it," she lied, the words bitter on her tongue. "I'll know tomorrow." Samuel nodded, relief softening the lines around his eyes. "That's something, at least. The shipment from Knoxville might arrive by week's end. If the road's clear, we could have enough to at least make a partial payment." They both knew it was unlikely. The spring floods had washed out the eastern road, and even if the goods arrived, they wouldn't bring in enough to cover even half of what they owed the sheriff, a debt that had mysteriously grown with each passing month, despite their payments. "You should rest, Pa," Eliza said, moving to extinguish the lamps. "I'll finish up here." When Samuel had gone upstairs to their modest living quarters above the store, Eliza sank onto a stool behind the counter, finally allowing the tears to come. Sheriff Hayes's proposition echoed in her mind. Marriage, to become the wife of a man whose cruelty was matched only by his cunning, whose hand had struck as many townspeople as it had shaken. Outside, the rain continued to fall, pattering against the windows like tiny fists demanding entrance. Eliza was so lost in her despair that she didn't notice the shadow pass across the front of the store, nor did she hear the soft knock at first. When it came again, more insistent, she quickly wiped her eyes and moved cautiously to the door. "We're closed," she called out, her hand on the bolt. "I know," came the reply, a deep voice with an accent that marked the speaker as native. "But I have something for Mr. Morgan, medicine for his cough." Eliza hesitated. Her father's cough had worsened over the winter, and Dr. Patterson's tonics had done little to help. Rumors around town spoke of the Cherokee healer who lived at the edge of the settlement, a man who knew the secrets of plants that could cure what white medicine could not. Some of the townswomen consulted him in secret, though they would deny it in the light of day. She slid back the bolt and opened the door just enough to see the visitor. He stood tall despite the rain, his black hair tied back, his clothing a mix of white man's garb and traditional Cherokee elements. Most striking were his eyes, dark and penetrating, yet not unkind. "River," she said, recognizing him from the few times he had come to town to trade. "It's late for business." "Healing doesn't keep hours," he replied, holding up a small cloth pouch. "Your father's breathing is worse. I heard it when he came to the edge of town yesterday looking for the mail coach." Eliza opened the door wider, glancing up and down the deserted street before allowing him inside. If anyone saw a Cherokee man entering the store at this hour, the gossip would spread faster than the spring floods. "How much?" she asked, reaching for the meager cash box beneath the counter. River shook his head. "I don't want money, but there is something you could trade." Suspicion flared in Eliza. She'd heard enough warnings about the savage ways of Indians to be wary, though her own interactions with River had never given her cause for alarm. "What kind of trade?" she asked cautiously. "Information," he said simply. "The sheriff and his men rode to the North Ridge yesterday. They returned with heavy packs but nothing to declare at your store. I want to know what they found." The question surprised Eliza. The sheriff's business was his own, and questioning it openly had led more than one person to find themselves spending a night in the jail cells behind his office. "I don't know anything about the sheriff's business," she said, though her mind flashed to the rumors of Confederate gold hidden in the mountains, gold that Hayes had been searching for since his arrival. "You know more than you think," River said, his gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "The sheriff talks to you differently than the others. He watches you." A chill ran down Eliza's spine that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. Yes, Hayes had watched her for months now, his attention growing more focused, more possessive. She had tried to ignore it, to avoid being alone with him, but in a town the size of Pine Ridge, such evasion was nearly impossible. "If the sheriff found something valuable," she said carefully, "it would explain why he's suddenly so intent on collecting debts." River's expression shifted subtly, or why he might offer other arrangements to secure what he wants. Eliza stiffened. "How did you—" "The walls of his office are not as thick as he believes," River said, "and I have learned to move quietly among those who would rather not see me at all." The realization that he had overheard her conversation with Hayes should have frightened her, but instead Eliza felt a strange relief. Someone else knew, someone outside the sheriff's influence. "He wants to marry me," she said, the words escaping in a rush, as if speaking them might somehow diminish their power. "By sundown tomorrow, I have to agree to be his wife, or my father goes to prison for debt." River was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her face. "There is another way," he finally said, "but it requires courage and trust." I have little of either left, Eliza admitted. Then perhaps it's time to find them again. He placed the pouch of medicine on the counter. 2 pinches in hot water, morning and night, for your father's lungs. And for you... He withdrew a small carved wooden amulet on a leather cord from his pocket. For protection. Eliza took the necklace hesitantly. It was beautifully crafted, a circular pendant with symbols she didn't recognize, etched into the dark wood. I can't accept this, she began, but River closed her fingers around it. You will need it, he said. When darkness falls tomorrow, come to Widow's Creek. Follow it east until you reach the split oak. I will be waiting. Before she could respond, he moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Do not tell anyone where you're going, especially not your father. Why would I trust you? Eliza asked, the pendant warm in her palm. River looked back at her, his expression grave. Because unlike the sheriff, I have never pretended to be something I am not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With that, he slipped out into the rain, leaving Eliza with more questions than answers and a decision that seemed impossible to make. The next day dawned clear and bright, as if nature herself was mocking Eliza's dark thoughts. She moved through, her chores mechanically, serving the few customers who came to the store, all the while feeling the hours slipping away like sand through an hourglass. Her father seemed better after taking River's medicine, his cough less severe, his breathing easier. She had not told him about Hayes' ultimatum, nor about River's cryptic offer of help. What was there to tell? That she was considering fleeing with a man she barely knew rather than marry the tyrant who held their fate in his hands. It was madness. And yet, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eliza found herself packing a small bag, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and the little money she had saved. Madness, perhaps, but what choice did she have? The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the store. Abigail Peterson, the mayor's wife, and the most notorious gossip in Pine Ridge, swept in with a rustle of petticoats and the overpowering scent of lavender water. Eliza, dear, she cooed, removing her gloves with deliberate slowness. I've come to offer my congratulations. Eliza froze, her hand halfway to a jar of candy on the shelf. I'm afraid I don't understand, Mrs. Peterson. Oh, come now, the older woman said with a knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. The whole town is talking about your engagement to Sheriff Hayes. Such a fortunate match for a girl in your circumstances. Cold dread washed over Eliza. Hayes had already begun spreading the news, ensuring she would have no graceful way to refuse him. In a town where reputation was currency, to publicly reject the sheriff after he had announced their engagement would be social suicide. The sheriff has been very kind, Eliza managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising within her. But nothing has been decided. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. That's not what I heard. In fact, the sheriff was just at the church, discussing the ceremony with Reverend Turner for this Sunday, I believe. This Sunday, 3 days away. The room seemed to tilt, and Eliza gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Are you well, dear? You look quite pale. Mrs. Peterson's concern was as false as her smile. Perhaps the excitement is too much. Marriage is a significant step, especially to a man of the sheriff's reputation. The way she lingered on the word reputation made it clear she was referring to the whispered stories of Hayes' first wife, a delicate woman from Virginia who had died under mysterious circumstances barely a year after their marriage. The official story was fever, but the rumors suggested otherwise. If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Peterson, Eliza said, moving toward the back room, I need to check our inventory. Of course, dear. I just wanted to be the first to wish you joy. Mrs. Peterson replaced her gloves with the same deliberate care she had removed them. The sheriff is quite determined to have you as his bride. Quite determined indeed. After the woman left, Eliza sank to the floor of the storeroom, her heart pounding. There was no choice now. If she stayed, she would be trapped in a marriage to a man she feared, a man whose cruelty was masked by the badge he wore. By sundown, he would come for her answer, expecting her submission. But sundown was also when River would be waiting at the Split Oak, a man she barely knew, offering an escape she couldn't fully trust, yet somehow seemed less dangerous than the future that awaited her in Pine Ridge. The afternoon crept by with excruciating slowness. Samuel Morgan returned to the store after his meeting with the town council, his mood unusually light. The strangest thing happened, he told Eliza as he hung up his coat. Sheriff Hayes informed the council that our debt has been rearranged. We have until the end of the month to make a payment, and the amount has been reduced. Eliza's stomach twisted. The gesture was calculated to appear generous, to paint Hayes as benevolent in the eyes of the town, and to make her seem ungrateful if she refused his proposal. That's wonderful news, she lied, forcing a smile. Indeed it is, and there's more. Samuel's eyes twinkled with a hope she hadn't seen in years. The sheriff hinted that he might have a personal interest in our family's success. Eliza, I think he means to court you. The words struck her like a physical blow. Her father saw this as salvation, unaware that it was the opposite. Pa, the sheriff isn't the man you think he is, she began, but Samuel waved her concerns away. He's brought law to this town, Eliza. Before him, we had chaos, and while his methods may sometimes seem harsh, the results speak for themselves. Pine Ridge is safe. Businesses can thrive again. At what cost? Eliza asked quietly. Samuel sighed, placing his hands on her shoulders. We've had this discussion before. The world is changing, and we must change with it. Hayes represents progress, security. And if I don't want to marry him? Her father's expression hardened slightly. Sometimes we must do things we don't want for the greater good. Your mother would have wanted you settled, secure. Eliza bit back a retort. Her mother, who had died during the war while tending to wounded soldiers, regardless of the color of their uniform, would never have wanted her to marry a man like Nathaniel Hayes. But her father had rewritten the past to cope with the present, painting a version of her mother that aligned with his own compromises. I need some air, Eliza said, untying her apron. I'll be back before closing. Before her father could object, she grabbed her shawl and slipped out the back door. The air was heavy with the scent of impending rain, the sky darkening to the west. She had only a few hours until sundown, until she would have to choose between Hayes's demand and River's uncertain offer. Eliza walked aimlessly through the town, past the church where Reverend Turner was already preparing for a wedding she had not agreed to, past the jail where Hayes's deputy Frank Collins watched her with curious eyes, past Martha Wilkins's dress shop where the seamstress was likely already planning what would be needed for a bridal gown. Her feet carried her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads and then to the wilderness beyond. Widow's Creek was about 2 miles east, its waters swollen with the spring rains. The Split Oak River had mentioned was a local landmark, an ancient tree that had been struck by lightning decades ago, but somehow continued to thrive. Its trunk divided into 2 massive stems that reached toward the sky like supplicants in prayer. Could she really do this? Leave behind everything she knew, her father, her home, on the word of a Cherokee healer who might be leading her into even greater danger. As if summoned by her thoughts, a horse and rider appeared on the path ahead. Sheriff Hayes sat tall in the saddle, his badge catching the fading sunlight as he approached. Eliza froze, her heart hammering as he reined in beside her. "Miss Morgan," he said, tipping his hat with mocking formality. "Quite a ways from the store, aren't you?" "Just getting some fresh air, Sheriff," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Hayes dismounted, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. He was a handsome man in a hard way, with features that might have been attractive if not for the coldness that radiated from him. "I believe we have a matter to discuss," he said, stepping closer than propriety allowed. "Your answer to my proposal." "I haven't decided," Eliza said, taking a step back. Hayes's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I think you have. Your father seems quite pleased with the arrangement. The town is already buzzing with the news. You had no right to tell anyone before I gave my answer," Eliza said, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "I had every right." Hayes reached out, grasping her wrist with enough pressure to make his point without leaving marks. "This town is mine, Eliza. Everything in it is mine, including you." "I belong to no one," she said, trying to pull away. Hayes's grip tightened. "Your father seems to think otherwise. He practically offered you to me this morning, grateful that I would take his failing business and troublesome daughter off his hands." The words cut deep, and Eliza wondered how much truth they contained. Had her father truly been so eager to resolve their problems that he would sacrifice her happiness? "I'll expect you at the church on Sunday," Hayes continued, releasing her wrist. "Wear something appropriate. As my wife, you'll need to set an example for the other women in town." "And if I refuse?" The question escaped before she could stop. Hayes's expression hardened, the pretense of civility dropping away. "Then your father will find himself facing charges of fraud, tax evasion, and whatever else I decide to add to the list. The penalty for such crimes can be severe." The threat hung in the air between them, as tangible as the gathering storm clouds. "You have until sunset," Hayes said, mounting his horse again, "though I think we both know what your answer will be." He rode away, leaving Eliza shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. She watched until he disappeared around the bend, then turned toward Widow's Creek. There was no choice now. Whatever risks awaited her in the wilderness with River, they couldn't be worse than the fate Hayes had planned for her. The sun was low on the horizon by the time Eliza reached the split. Oak, the massive tree, stood sentinel at a bend in Widow's Creek, its divided trunk creating a natural archway. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing, scanning the shadows for any sign of River. "You came." His voice came from behind her, making her start. River emerged from the trees, leading a horse loaded with supplies. He wore a leather jacket over a simple shirt, his hair tied back, a rifle slung across his back. "The sheriff is expecting my answer by sunset," Eliza said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "He's already told the town we're to be married. On Sunday." River's expression darkened. "Then we have no time to waste. Can you ride?" Eliza nodded. Her mother had taught her as a child, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. "Where are we going?" she asked as River helped her mount. "There's a place in the mountains where my people have gathered, those who refused to march west when the government demanded it. It's hidden, safe from men like Hayes." River swung up behind her, his presence solid and strangely reassuring. "But first, we must reach my cabin. There are things I need before we go deeper into the mountains." As they rode away from the split oak, following a narrow trail that wound through the dense forest, Eliza felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had left behind everything she knew, placing her trust in a man who was as much a mystery as the wilderness. They now entered. The first drops of rain began to fall as the last light of day faded from the sky. Behind them in Pine Ridge, Sheriff Hayes would be arriving at the Morgan General Store, expecting to claim his prize. Instead, he would find only Samuel Morgan, unaware that his daughter had chosen freedom over the false security of the sheriff's protection. and as the storm closed in around them, Eliza clutched the wooden amulet River had given her, praying she had made the right choice. The rain fell in sheets, transforming the forest path into a treacherous ribbon of mud and fallen leaves. Eliza clung to the saddle, her knuckles white with effort as the horse picked its way carefully along the narrow trail. River sat behind her, his presence solid and warm against the chill of the storm, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins with practiced ease. They had been riding for over an hour, the darkness growing more complete as they ventured deeper into the smoky mountains. Lightning occasionally illuminated the forest in stark, ghostly flashes, followed by the low rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. "How much farther?" Eliza asked, raising her voice above the drumming of rain on leaves. "Not far now," River replied, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a clearing ahead where the path widens." True to his word, the trail soon opened into a small meadow where a modest cabin stood, partially sheltered by a cluster of ancient oaks. It was a simple structure, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one side. No light shone from its single window, but as they approached, Eliza could see that it was sturdily constructed, far better than the crude shelter she had imagined. River dismounted first, then helped Eliza down. Her legs trembled, partly from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle and partly from the enormity of what she had done. She had fled Pine Ridge, abandoned her father, and placed her life in the hands of a man who was little more than a stranger. "Wait here," River said, leading the horse to a small lean-to stable attached to the side of the cabin. He returned moments later, gesturing for her to follow him to the door. The interior of the cabin was dark and smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. River moved with the confidence of familiarity, striking a match to light a lantern that hung from a beam. As the warm glow filled the room, Eliza looked around, surprised by what she saw. The cabin was modest but well appointed. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and 2 chairs nearby. Shelves lined another wall, filled with books, jars of dried plants and various containers whose contents she could only guess at. A curtain partially concealed what appeared to be a sleeping area in the back. "You live here alone?" she asked, removing her sodden shawl. River nodded, kneeling at the fireplace to kindle a fire from the banked coals. "It's safer this way, for me and for my people. I thought Cherokee people lived in villages." A ghost of a smile crossed River's face. "Many do. Some of us prefer solitude." The fire caught, casting dancing shadows across his features, "especially those who exist between 2 worlds." As the flames grew stronger, Eliza moved closer, extending her hands toward the welcome heat. Her clothes were damp, her hair plastered to her head, and the warmth of the fire was like a blessing after the cold journey. "You should change," River said, disappearing behind the curtain and returning with a bundle of fabric. "These belong to my sister. They will be too large, but they're dry." Eliza accepted the clothing hesitantly. "Your sister? Is she gone?" River said simply. "Like many of our people. Sickness came to our village 3 winters ago." The loss in his voice was palpable, and Eliza found herself responding to it. "I'm sorry. My mother died during the war. Fever took her while she was nursing soldiers." River nodded, acknowledging their shared grief without unnecessary words. "Change," he repeated, turning his back to give her privacy. "I'll prepare something to eat." Eliza retreated to the corner farthest from the fire, quickly shedding her wet dress and petticoats and donning the garments River had provided. The clothing was indeed too large, a long skirt of soft deerskin and a loose cotton shirt. But the comfort of dry fabric against her skin overshadowed any concerns about fit or propriety. By the time she had finished, River had placed a pot of water over the fire and was adding various dried ingredients from his stores. "Stew," he explained when he saw her watching. "Not what you might be used to, but it will warm you." Eliza sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket River had given her, watching as he moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency. Despite the strangeness of her situation, she found herself feeling oddly at ease. The cabin was warm, the rain outside creating a soothing backdrop to the crackle of the fire. "The sheriff will be looking for me by now," she said, breaking the companionable silence. River paused in his work, his expression grave. "Yes, Hayes is not a man who accepts defeat. My father." Eliza's voice faltered as she thought of Samuel Morgan learning of her disappearance. "He'll think I abandoned him." "Would you rather have married the sheriff?" River asked, his directness startling her. "No," she admitted, "but I fear what Hayes might do to my father in retaliation." River stirred the pot thoughtfully. "Your father has friends in town, the Reverend, the blacksmith. They will not let Hayes harm him openly. And secretly, the sheriff has ways of making life difficult without seeming to be the cause." "True," River acknowledged, "but we have little choice now. We must trust that your father's friends will keep him safe until we can send word." "Send word?" Eliza straightened. "From where? How far are we going?" River ladled the stew into 2 wooden bowls, placing one before her along with a spoon carved from horn. "We leave at first light for the high country. There's a settlement there, hidden among the peaks. My people, those who refuse to walk the Trail of Tears, have made a life beyond the reach of men like Hayes. And they'll welcome a white woman?" Eliza asked skeptically. "They will welcome anyone who comes seeking refuge from injustice," River replied, though something in his tone suggested it might not be quite that simple. They ate in silence, the stew proving more flavorful than Eliza had expected, rich with unfamiliar herbs and the earthiness of root vegetables. Despite her anxiety, hunger won out, and she found herself finishing the entire bowl. "Thank you," she said, as River cleared away their meal. "For the food, and for helping me escape. I know it puts you at risk." River looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I have my own reasons for opposing Hayes," he said finally. "Your need for escape merely provided an opportunity." The statement was cryptic, and Eliza sensed there was more to the story than he was revealing. "What reasons?" she asked. River moved to one of the shelves, removing a small wooden box intricately carved with symbols similar to those on the amulet he had given her. He placed it on the table, between them, opening it to reveal a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. "6 months ago, Hayes and his men raided a sacred site in the mountains," River said, unfolding the paper to reveal a crudely drawn map. "They claimed they were hunting a fugitive, but they were searching for something else, Confederate gold, hidden during the last days of the war." Eliza leaned forward, studying the map. It showed a section of the mountains, with various landmarks marked in a mixture of English and what she assumed was Cherokee. "Did they find it?" "No, but he found this." River drew another object from the box, a small golden medallion on a broken chain. "It belonged to my grandfather. He was at the site protecting it when Hayes arrived. They killed him," Eliza guessed, a chill running through her despite the warmth of the fire. River nodded, his jaw tightening. "And 3 others, elders, who had remained to guard our ancestral grounds while the younger ones moved to safety." "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, understanding now why River had been watching the sheriff so carefully, why he had been willing to risk helping her. "Hayes took trophies from those he killed," River continued, his voice hard. "This medallion was returned to me by Martha Wilkins. She found it in his office when she was delivering linens and recognized the symbols as Cherokee." Eliza was startled by the mention of the shopkeeper. Martha helped you. There are those in Pine Ridge who see Hayes for what he is, River confirmed, who help when they can in small ways. The revelation that others in town secretly opposed the sheriff gave Eliza a flicker of hope. Perhaps her father would indeed be protected in her absence. "What about the gold?" she asked, returning to the original subject. "Is it real?" "Very real," River said, carefully folding the map and returning it to the box. A Confederate paymaster hid it in the mountains when it became clear the South would fall. He died before he could return for it, but not before creating several maps, each showing a piece of the route. And Hayes has one of these maps? He has been collecting them for years. That's why he came to Pine Ridge, to search for the gold that is said to be hidden in these mountains. River closed the box with a decisive click. And now he believes he has found it. That's why he was in such a hurry to collect debts and to marry me, Eliza realized. He wants to secure his position before claiming the gold and leaving. River nodded. The men who rode with him to the North Ridge, they found something. I'm not certain it was the gold itself, but perhaps the final clue to its location. The fire popped and hissed, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the rain continued unabated, drumming against the roof of the cabin with hypnotic persistence. "You should rest," River said, rising from the table. "Tomorrow's journey will be difficult, especially if the rain continues." "Where will you sleep?" Eliza asked, suddenly aware of the intimate confines of the cabin. "Here," River replied, indicating a bedroll near the fire. "You take the bed behind the curtain." Propriety demanded she refuse, but exhaustion won out. Eliza nodded gratefully, retreating behind the curtain to the small sleeping area. The bed was simple, a platform of woven saplings covered with a straw-filled mattress and several blankets. But after the day's events, it seemed as inviting as the finest feather bed. As she lay down, the weight of everything that had happened crashed over her like a wave. She had fled her home, left her father to face the sheriff's wrath alone, and placed her trust in a man whose own motives remained partially shrouded in mystery. Tears came unbidden, silent and hot against her cheeks. Sleep seemed impossible, yet eventually the steady rhythm of the rain and the distant crackle of the fire lulled her into a fitful slumber. Dreams came, fragmented and disturbing. She saw her father standing in the empty store, calling her name. She saw Sheriff Hayes mounted on his horse, leading a band of men with torches through the forest. And most vividly, she saw her mother as she had looked before the war took her, strong and kind, her hands gentle as she tended a wounded bird. "Trust your heart," her mother seemed to say, the words more feeling than sound. "It knows the way. When your mind is lost." Eliza woke with a start, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory returned, bringing with it the weight of her situation. The cabin was quiet, the fire reduced to a soft glow visible through the gap in the curtain. She lay still, listening to the gentle patter of rain on the roof, less urgent now than it had been earlier. How long had she slept? Hours at least, though it was impossible to tell if dawn was approaching without being able to see the sky. A sound from the main room caught her attention. A soft scraping, followed by what might have been a voice speaking words in Cherokee. Curiosity overcoming caution, Eliza slipped from beneath the blankets and moved to the edge of the curtain, peering through the gap. River sat cross-legged before the fire, his back to her. Before him on the floor lay several small objects. The medallion she had seen earlier, a handful of what looked like polished stones, and something that gleamed dully in the firelight. Perhaps a knife or tool. His hands moved over these objects in a pattern that seemed ritualistic, and though his voice was too low for her to make out the words, the cadence suggested prayer or invocation. Eliza watched, transfixed, aware that she was witnessing something deeply personal, perhaps sacred. She should withdraw, give him privacy, yet something kept her rooted to the spot. Not mere curiosity, but a sense that this moment was somehow important, perhaps even vital to understanding the man who had risked his safety to help her. The ritual, if that's what it was, continued for several minutes. Then River gathered the objects, returning them to the wooden box with careful movements. He remained kneeling by the fire, his head bowed, for a long moment before finally rising and moving to his bedroll. Eliza retreated silently to the bed, her mind filled with questions. River was more complex than most of the townsfolk believed. His connection to his heritage, deeper than his outward appearance, with its concessions to white ways, might suggest. It made her wonder what else she didn't know about him. What other complexities lay beneath his reserved exterior. Sleep reclaimed her eventually, but the image of River kneeling before the fire stayed with her, joining the fragments of her earlier dreams in a mosaic of half-formed impressions and unanswered questions. The touch of a hand on her shoulder woke her again, and she opened her eyes to find River standing over her, his expression grave. "It's nearly dawn," he said quietly. "We need to prepare to leave." The main room of the cabin was filled with the grey light of early morning, the rain having finally ceased during the night. River had been busy while she slept. A small pile of supplies was neatly arranged near the door, and a pot of something that smelled like pine needles and herbs steamed over the rekindled fire. "Tea," River explained, handing her a cup of the aromatic liquid. "It will give you strength for the journey." Eliza accepted it gratefully, the warmth of the cup welcome against the morning chill. The tea was bitter but not unpleasant, leaving a tingling sensation in her mouth that seemed to spread through her body, easing the stiffness from her muscles. "Your clothes are still damp," River observed, glancing at where her dress hung near the fire. "Better to continue wearing those until we reach the settlement." Eliza nodded, acutely aware that her current attire, the loose shirt and deerskin skirt belonging to River's deceased sister, would have been considered scandalously inappropriate in Pine Ridge. Out here, however, practicality outweighed propriety. "How far is it to this settlement?" she asked, finishing the tea. "A day's ride if the weather holds," River replied, gathering the remaining supplies into a leather satchel. "Longer if the streams are too swollen to cross." Eliza helped as best she could, rolling blankets and securing food in oilcloth packages as River directed. Despite the urgency of their departure, there was a methodical calm to his preparations that she found reassuring. This was clearly not the first time he had needed to move quickly, and his confidence helped steady her own nerves. They were nearly ready when a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable baying of hounds. "Hayes," River said, his voice tight. "He's tracking us." Fear shot through Eliza like ice water. "How? The rain should have washed away our trail." "Dogs don't need a visible trail," River replied, moving swiftly to the door and peering out. "They follow scent, and Hayes has the best hunting hounds in the county." The baying came again, closer this time, confirming River's assessment. The sheriff and his men were approaching, and faster than either of them had anticipated. "We need to go. Now." River grabbed the satchel and his rifle, gesturing for Eliza to take the remaining pack. "There's a back way through the trees. The horses is already saddled." They slipped out through a small door at the rear of the cabin that Eliza hadn't noticed before. The morning air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and vegetation. The forest around them dripped with the night's rain, and the ground was soft beneath their feet. River led her to where the horse waited, already laden with their supplies. "I had hoped to have more time," he said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "We'll have to take a more difficult route." The baying of the hounds grew louder, accompanied now by the distant sound of men's voices. Hayes and his posse were close, too close. River urged the horse forward, not along the trail Eliza expected, but directly into the dense undergrowth that bordered the clearing. Branches whipped at them as they pushed through, Eliza ducking to avoid being struck in the face, while River guided the horse with sure knowledge of the hidden path. They emerged onto what appeared to be a game trail, narrow but passable, that wound upward into the mountains. River pressed on without hesitation, the horse picking its way carefully over the uneven ground. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly as they climbed, but did not disappear entirely. "The stream ahead will help mask our scent," River said close, to her ear, his breath warm against her cold skin. "But Hayes knows these mountains almost as well as I do. He won't give up easily." The trail grew steeper, more treacherous, and Eliza found herself clinging to the saddle horn as the horse navigated sections that seemed barely wide enough for it to pass. In places, the path skirted precipitous drops, the bottom obscured by morning mist that clung to the mountainside like trailing ghosts. When they reached the stream River had mentioned, it was a churning torrent swollen by the night's rain, far more formidable than Eliza had expected. River dismounted, leading the horse to the edge and studying the rushing water with a frown. "Can we cross?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "We must," River replied, though his expression suggested he was less than certain. "Of their chances, the alternative is to backtrack, and that would lead us straight to Hayes." He remounted behind her, guiding the horse into the water with gentle but firm pressure. The current immediately pulled at the animal's legs, and Eliza gasped as icy water splashed up, soaking through her skirt and boots. "Hold tight," River instructed, his arm tightening around her waist as the horse struggled to find footing in the streambed. The crossing was harrowing, the horse slipping several times on the submerged rocks, nearly losing its balance. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest, her fingers white-knuckled on the saddle horn. When they finally reached the far bank, she realized she had been holding her breath. River didn't allow them to pause, immediately urging the horse up the steep bank and into the forest on the other side. The terrain here was different, denser, darker, the trees older and more massive than those near the cabin. The trail, if it could be called that, was barely visible, marked only by subtle signs that Eliza couldn't begin to discern. "They won't be able to follow us as easily now," River said, though he continued to glance back periodically, listening for sounds of pursuit. "The stream will confuse the dogs, and this path is known only to my people." "Where does it lead?" Eliza asked, attempting to orientate herself but finding no familiar landmarks in the wilderness around them. "To an old meeting place," River replied. "From there, we can reach the settlement by nightfall if we push hard." The morning passed in a blur of constant movement. They traveled ever upward, the air growing cooler and thinner as they ascended. Twice more they crossed streams, though neither as challenging as the first. The forest gradually gave way to more open terrain, rocky outcroppings and meadows, dotted with wildflowers that somehow managed to thrive in the harsh mountain environment. By midday, they paused briefly in a sheltered hollow to rest the horse and eat a meager meal of dried meat and hard bread from River's supplies. Eliza's body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and she moved stiffly as she stretched her legs. "No sign of pursuit," River said, scanning the trail behind them. "But that doesn't mean Hayes has given up. He may be taking another route, trying to cut us off." "Cut us off?" Eliza frowned. "How would he know where we're headed?" River's expression was grim, "Because he's been hunting for the settlement for months. He believes my people are hiding something valuable, either part of the Confederate gold or information leading to it." "And are they?" Eliza asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. River gave her a long look, weighing how much to reveal. "My grandfather was the keeper of many secrets," he said finally. "Some of them died with him when Hayes attacked the sacred site. Others were passed to those who now guard the settlement." It wasn't exactly an answer, but Eliza understood the message beneath the words. There was indeed something the Cherokee were protecting, something Hayes wanted badly enough to kill for. And now she was caught in the middle of this conflict, with no way back to the life she had known. "We should move on," River said, gathering their few belongings. "There's a place ahead where we can see the valley below. It will tell us if Hayes is still following." Back on the trail, they climbed, steadily until they reached a rocky outcropping that jutted from the mountainside like the prow of a ship. From this vantage point, the view was breathtaking. The valley stretched below them, a patchwork of forest and meadow, with Widow's Creek a silver ribbon winding through it. In the far distance, barely visible through the haze, lay the tiny cluster of buildings that was Pine Ridge. River dismounted, helping Eliza down before taking out a brass spyglass from his saddlebag. He extended it, scanning the valley methodically. "There," he said after a moment, handing her the glass and pointing to a spot halfway up the opposite slope. Eliza raised the spyglass, adjusting it until the distant figures came into focus. A group of riders, 7 or 8 men with several dogs running alongside, moved along a trail that roughly paralleled the one they had taken. At their head rode a figure she immediately recognized as Sheriff Hayes, his distinctive hat and the glint of his badge visible even at this distance. "They're not following our exact path," River observed, "but they're heading in the same general direction. Hayes must suspect where we're going." "How could he know about the settlement if it's so well hidden?" Eliza asked, lowering the spyglass. "Traitors," River said simply. "Or torture. Hayes has ways of extracting information from those unfortunate, enough to fall into his hands." The thought sent a chill through Eliza, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. She had known the sheriff was ruthless, but the casual way River spoke of torture suggested a level of cruelty that went beyond even her worst fears. "We need to warn your people," she said, handing back the spyglass. River nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, and we need to reach them before Hayes does." They remounted and continued their journey, pushing the horse harder now that they knew the danger was real and closing in. The trail grew more precarious as they ascended further into the mountains, in places becoming so steep that they had to dismount and lead the horse on foot. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered again, obscuring the peaks ahead and bringing with them a damp chill that seemed to seep into Eliza's very bones. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and each step required conscious effort. Only the knowledge that Hayes and his men were somewhere behind them kept her moving forward. "Not much farther," River encouraged as they crested yet another ridge. "The entrance to the hidden valley lies just beyond that stand of pines." Eliza raised her tired eyes to where he pointed, seeing nothing but more wilderness, indistinguishable from what they had been traversing for hours. How River navigated. This trackless expanse was beyond her comprehension, yet his confidence never wavered. They had just started down the far side of the ridge when a sound stopped them both. A single gunshot echoing across the valley, followed by several more in quick succession. "That came from ahead," River said, his body tensing, "from the direction of the settlement." Before Eliza could respond, movement on the trail below caught her eye. A figure emerged from the trees, running with the desperate pace of someone fleeing for their life. Even from a distance, she could see it was a woman, her long dark hair streaming behind her as she sprinted up the slope toward them. River stiffened. Beside her, recognition dawning on his face. "Morning Star," he said, his voice tight with concern. The woman spotted them and altered her course, scrambling over rocks and through brush with single-minded determination. As she drew closer, Eliza could see she was young, perhaps 20 or so, and dressed similarly to River in a mixture of traditional Cherokee and practical frontier clothing. Blood stained one sleeve of her buckskin shirt, and her face was streaked with dirt and what might have been tears. "River!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "They found us! Hayes and his men! They attacked the settlement!" The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Hayes had somehow gotten ahead of them, reached the settlement first, which meant... "The children?" River asked, moving forward to catch Morningstar as she stumbled the last few steps up the slope. "Safe," she gasped, clutching his arm for support. "We got them out through the hidden passage when the first shots came. The elders are with them, heading for the high caves." She paused, fighting for breath, but Grey Wolf and several others stayed to fight, to give us time to escape. River's face hardened, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed rage. "How many men with Hayes?" "At least 10, Morningstar replied, glancing warily at Eliza. "Who is she?" "A friend," River said, simply. "Hayes wanted to force her into marriage. She fled with me last night." Morningstar's dark eyes assessed Eliza with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "So she's the reason he came hunting us with such determination?" "No," River corrected firmly. "He was always coming for the settlement, for what he believes. We have." Eliza's presence might have hastened his plans, but she is not the cause. Morningstar seemed unconvinced, but the urgency of their situation prevented further discussion. "We need to help the others," she said, turning back toward the direction she had come. "Grey Wolf was hit, but still fighting when I left." River nodded, his decision made in an instant. "Take the horse," he said to Eliza. "Go with Morningstar to the high caves. I'll help those at the settlement and join you later." "No," Eliza protested, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't leave you to face Hayes alone. This is partly my fight too." Morningstar made a sound of impatience. "We don't have time for this. More of Hayes's men were coming up from the east side of the valley. They'll be on us soon if we don't move." As if to punctuate her words, more gunshots echoed across the mountainside, closer this time. River hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "Together then," he said, his eyes meeting Eliza's with a mixture of concern and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. "But we go carefully. Hayes doesn't know yet that we've arrived, and that may be our only advantage." As they prepared to descend into the valley where the settlement and Sheriff Hayes waited, Eliza felt fear knotting her stomach. Yet beneath, it was a steely determination she hadn't known she possessed. She had fled Pine Ridge to escape a forced marriage to a cruel man. Now she found herself willingly heading toward that same man, toward danger that made her previous fears seem pale in comparison. But she was no longer alone. And for the first time since her mother's death, she felt as if she might be exactly where she needed to be. River led them down a nearly invisible path that zigzagged across the steep slope. The horse followed on a long lead, carefully picking its way over the treacherous terrain. Morningstar moved with the sure-footedness of someone born to the mountains, occasionally glancing back at Eliza with an expression that mingled doubt and grudging respect. "The settlement is hidden in a fold of the mountain," River explained as they descended. "From below, it appears to be nothing but a rock face. From above, trees conceal it. Only those who know the way can find it." "Yet Hayes did," Eliza pointed out, her breath coming in short gasps as she navigated the difficult trail. Morningstar's response was sharp. "Someone betrayed us, or was forced to reveal our location." They paused at a jutting boulder that provided momentary cover. Below them, perhaps half a mile distant, smoke rose in thin grey tendrils from what Eliza assumed was the settlement. The gunfire had ceased, replaced by an ominous silence that seemed more threatening than the previous sounds of battle. "We need to know what we're walking into," River said, scanning the slope below for any sign of movement. "Morningstar, take The eastern approach. I'll go in from the west. Eliza, stay with the horse in that stand of pines." He pointed to a dense cluster of trees about 100 yards downslope. "If we're not back in half an hour, or if you hear shooting, take the horse and follow the ridge east until you reach a waterfall. The path to the high caves is behind it." Eliza wanted to protest, to insist on staying with River, but the logic of his plan was undeniable. She was untrained in wilderness survival, unfamiliar with the terrain, and would likely be more hindrance than help in a scouting mission. "Be careful," she said instead, meeting River's eyes. Something flickered in his gaze. Surprise, perhaps, at her concern or at the intensity behind it. He nodded once, then turned to Morningstar. The two exchanged a few quiet words in Cherokee before heading in opposite directions, moving with a stealth born of long practice. Eliza led the horse to the designated hiding place, finding shelter beneath the low-hanging branches of the pines. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more alarming than the last. Had Hayes captured the defenders? Was he still at the settlement? Or had he moved on in pursuit of the evacuated women and children? And what of River? Was he walking into a trap? The minutes stretched endlessly, each small sound from the forest around her causing Eliza to start. A branch creaking in the wind became a footstep, a bird call transformed in her frightened imagination to a signal between Hayes's men. She found herself gripping the wooden amulet River had given her, drawing inexplicable comfort from its solid presence against her palm. When a hand touched her shoulder, Eliza nearly cried out, spinning to find Morningstar standing behind her. A finger pressed to her lips in warning. "Hayes and his men are still there," the Cherokee woman whispered, crouching beside Eliza. "They've taken prisoners at least 3 of our warriors, including Grey Wolf." "And River?" Eliza asked, dread coiling in her stomach. "I haven't seen him. He should have been back by now." Morningstar's concern was evident despite her obvious effort to hide it. "Something's wrong. We have to help him," Eliza said, rising to her feet. Morningstar caught her arm. "Wait, we need to think. Hayes has at least 8 men with him. They're armed and they have hostages." "What do they want?" Eliza asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The map," Morningstar confirmed. "They believe our elders have the final piece that will lead them to the Confederate gold. They're demanding it in exchange for the prisoners' lives." "And do you have the map?" Morningstar's expression became guarded. "Whether we do or not isn't the point. Even if we gave Hayes what he wants, he would kill the prisoners and us. He leaves no witnesses to his crimes." The harsh assessment aligned with everything Eliza knew of the sheriff. Hayes was not a man who kept his word, especially when breaking it served his interests. Whatever he sought in these mountains, he would not allow anyone to threaten his claim to it. "We need to free the prisoners," Eliza said, thinking aloud, "and find River." Morningstar studied her, reassessing. "You care for him," she observed. After knowing him such a short time, Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He risked his life to help me. Of course I care." A ghost of a smile touched Morningstar's lips. "Of course." She turned serious again. "I have a plan, but it's dangerous, and it will require your help." "Tell me," Eliza said without hesitation. Morningstar quickly outlined her strategy. Eliza would approach the settlement openly, claiming to have become separated from River and lost in the mountains. While Hayes and his men were distracted by her appearance, Morningstar would work to free the prisoners from behind. It was risky, relying heavily on Hayes's fixation on capturing Eliza and his belief that she would be helpless without River. "Hayes will recognize you immediately," Morningstar explained. "His desire to possess you will override his caution." The thought of deliberately placing herself in Hayes's power sent a chill through Eliza, but she nodded her agreement. "I'll do it, but what about River? If he's been captured, we'll free him with the others. If not..." Morningstar's expression darkened. "Then he may already be beyond our help." They left the horse secured in the pines and moved stealthily down the slope, parting ways when they reached the last stand of trees before the settlement. Morningstar melted into the forest, heading toward the eastern edge of the small village, while Eliza steeled herself for what was to come. The Cherokee settlement was smaller than she had imagined, perhaps a dozen structures nestled in a natural hollow of the mountainside. Some were traditional Cherokee dwellings, while others showed the influence of white settlers' cabins. All were arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing where, even from a distance, Eliza could see the evidence of the recent violence. Overturned cooking pots, scattered belongings, and dark stains that could only be blood marred the packed earth. Hayes and his men had established their position at the center of the settlement. 3 Cherokee men, bound and kneeling, were guarded by deputies with rifles. Among them, Eliza recognized the distinctive figure of Deputy Frank Collins, Hayes's most loyal and most brutal enforcer. Of River, there was no sign. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped out from the cover of the trees. She had deliberately disheveled her appearance, tearing her sleeve and smearing dirt on her face to enhance the impression of a woman who had been wandering lost in the wilderness. "Help!" she called, her voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Please, is anyone there?" The reaction was immediate. The deputies swung their rifles toward her, and several men emerged from the buildings they had been searching. Among them was Sheriff Nathaniel Hayes, his expression transforming from irritation to shock and then to triumphant satisfaction as he recognized her. "Well, well," he drawled, striding toward her with the confident swagger that had intimidated so many in Pine Ridge. "Miss Morgan, how kind of you to join us after all." Eliza backed away instinctively, allowing fear to show on her face, not difficult given the circumstances. "Sheriff Hayes, what are you doing here?" Hayes gestured to one of his men, who moved quickly to grasp Eliza's arm, preventing any attempt at escape. "I might ask you the same question, my dear. Last I recall, you disappeared rather than give me your answer to a certain proposal." Up close, Hayes looked different than he had in Pine Ridge. There was a wildness in his eyes, a tension in his bearing that spoke of a man pushed to the edge of his control. His normally immaculate appearance had given way to trail dust and the stubble of several days without shaving. Whatever drove him to pursue the gold had consumed him, transforming him from the calculating oppressor of Pine Ridge into something more openly dangerous. "I got lost," Eliza stammered, playing her part. "The Cherokee man who guided me, we became separated in the storm. I've been wandering for hours." Hayes's smile didn't reach his eyes. A touching tale, and entirely false. His hand shot out, grasping her chin roughly. "Where is your savage friend? Where is River?" "I don't know," Eliza answered truthfully, wincing at his grip. Hayes studied her face, searching for deception. "Take her to the others," he ordered finally, releasing her with a slight shove. "Perhaps she'll be more forthcoming when she sees what happens to those who defy me." The deputy marched Eliza to the center of the clearing, forcing her to kneel beside the captured Cherokee warriors. The one nearest to her was older, his face lined with dignity despite the blood trickling from a wound at his temple. Grey Wolf, she assumed, based on Morningstar's description. The other 2 were younger, one barely more than a boy. All 3 regarded her with stoic expressions that revealed nothing of their thoughts. Hayes paced before them, his spurs jingling with each step. "Now then, Miss Morgan, allow me to explain your situation. These men have something I want. the final piece of a map leading to a treasure that by rights belongs to the Confederacy. To me, as the highest-ranking Confederate officer in these parts. "The war is over, Sheriff," Eliza said, unable to keep the contempt from her voice. "There is no Confederacy." Hayes's hand struck her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. "The war is never over for those of us who understand what was lost," he snarled, "and what can be regained with the right resources." Eliza tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Around her, the deputies shifted uncomfortably, a few exchanging glances that suggested they hadn't signed on for this level of violence against a white woman. "Now," Hayes continued, regaining his composure, "I know River has been helping these people hide the map, and I know you spent the night with him." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "What did he tell you? What did—" "You see?" "Nothing," Eliza insisted. "He was helping me escape you, nothing more." Hayes straightened, his expression calculating. "Frank," he called to his deputy, "show Miss Morgan what happens to those who withhold information from me." Deputy Collins stepped forward, drawing his hunting knife from its sheath. The blade glinted in the afternoon light as he approached the youngest of the Cherokee prisoners. The boy, for he was little more than that, lifted his chin defiantly, though fear showed in his eyes. "Wait!" Eliza cried, desperate to prevent what was about to happen. "I'll tell you what I know." Hayes gestured for Collins to pause, turning his attention back to Eliza. "I'm listening." "River has a map," she said, her mind racing to construct a plausible story that might buy time without revealing anything useful. "He showed it to me last night, but it's only a fragment. He said the full map was divided among several guardians for safety." "This much I already know," Hayes said, impatiently. "Where is River's piece now?" "He carried it with him," Eliza improvised, "inside a wooden box with Cherokee symbols carved on it." Recognition flashed in Hayes's eyes, telling Eliza that her guess about the box she had seen in River's cabin was correct. "And where is River now?" "I told you we were separated!" The crack of a gunshot interrupted her, causing everyone in the clearing to flinch. One of Hayes's men cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. "Take cover!" Hayes shouted, drawing his revolver and scanning the tree line. In the ensuing confusion, Eliza felt a presence beside her. Grey Wolf had somehow managed to shift closer, despite his bonds. "Be ready," he murmured in accented English, "when the moment comes." Before she could ask what he meant, more shots rang out from different directions, creating the impression of multiple attackers. Hayes and his men returned fire, shooting blindly into the forest while trying to find cover among the Cherokee dwellings. Eliza realized what was happening. Morning Star was executing her plan, creating a diversion to allow them to escape. But the Cherokee woman couldn't be in multiple places at once, which meant, "River," she breathed, hope surging through her. Grey Wolf nodded slightly. "He lives. Now we must act." With a flexibility that belied his age, he brought his bound hands beneath him and to the front of his body, revealing that his ropes had been partially cut. Morning Star's work, no doubt, while the deputies were distracted by Eliza's arrival. Two of Hayes's men remained guarding the prisoners, their attention divided between their captives and the unseen attackers in the forest. When another volley of shots came, one guard moved farther away to return fire. Grey Wolf seized the moment, lunging at the remaining deputy with his shoulder, knocking the man off balance. Eliza reacted instinctively, throwing herself at the deputy's legs. He toppled with a surprised grunt, his rifle clattering away. Grey Wolf was on him in an instant, delivering a precise blow to the side of the man's head that rendered him unconscious. In seconds, Grey Wolf had freed himself completely and was cutting the bonds of the other warriors. "Run for the trees," he instructed Eliza, pressing a knife into her hands. "Head east, River will find you." "I won't leave you," she protested. "You must," he insisted. "Hayes wants you most of all now. If he recaptures you, all is lost." Before she could argue further, the younger warriors pulled her to her feet and pushed her toward the eastern edge of the clearing. One stayed with her while the other moved to help Grey Wolf, who was now grappling with a deputy who had noticed their escape. Gunfire continued to erupt from multiple directions, and through the chaos, Eliza caught a glimpse of Hayes. The sheriff stood in the doorway of the largest dwelling, shouting orders to his men while scanning the scene with cold calculation. His gaze locked onto Eliza as she fled, and the expression that crossed his face chilled her to the bone. Hayes raised his revolver, taking deliberate aim at her retreating form. Time seemed to slow as Eliza saw death in the barrel of his gun. Then a blur of movement intercepted the sheriff's line of sight. Morning Star, emerging from hiding to slam into Hayes with the force of a mountain cat, disrupting his aim. The shot went wild, and both figures disappeared into the dwelling amid the sounds of struggle. Eliza wanted to turn back to help Morning Star, but her companion pulled her relentlessly toward the trees. They had almost reached the cover of the forest when Deputy Frank Collins appeared before them, his rifle leveled at their chests. "Not another step," he growled, hatred twisting his features. The Cherokee warrior beside Eliza tensed, preparing to spring at Collins, despite the certain death that awaited him. But before either could move, a shadow detached itself from the trees behind the deputy. There was a dull thud, and Collins crumpled to the ground, revealing River standing behind him, a heavy branch in his hands. "River!" Eliza's relief was so profound she felt dizzy with it. He dropped the branch and rushed forward, grasping her arms as if to reassure himself she was real. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her face, lingering on the bruise forming where Hayes had struck her. "No, I'm fine," she assured him. "But Morning Star, she's fighting Hayes in that building." Eliza pointed to where she had last seen the Cherokee woman. River's expression hardened. "Swift Deer will get you to safety," he said, nodding to the warrior beside her. "I'll help Morning Star." "No," Eliza said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be sent away while others fight my battles. Hayes came after me as much as he came after your people." River hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to protect her and the respect her words commanded. Before he could respond, Grey Wolf joined them, breathing heavily from his exertions. "The others are free," he reported. "They've scattered into the forest as planned." Hayes's men are confused, firing at shadows. River made his decision quickly. "We need to end this now. Hayes is the head of the snake. Without him, his men will retreat." He turned to Eliza. "Stay with Grey Wolf. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, go with him to the high caves." This time, Eliza didn't argue, recognizing the grim determination in River's face. He was going to confront Hayes to settle what had begun months ago with the murder of his grandfather. This was his fight, his moment of reckoning. "Be careful," she said, the inadequacy of the words burning in her throat. River nodded once, then melted into the chaotic scene, moving with the silent efficiency that had kept him alive in a world that sought to destroy his people. Grey Wolf drew Eliza deeper into the cover of the trees, where they could observe the settlement while remaining hidden. The gunfire had diminished, suggesting that many of Hayes's men had either been wounded or had retreated. Smoke rose from one of the smaller dwellings, which had caught fire during the battle. "Hayes is dangerous now," Grey Wolf said quietly. "He knows his plan is failing. A cornered predator is most deadly." Eliza nodded, her eyes fixed on the building where River had gone. "What will happen when River defeats him?" Grey Wolf considered her question. "Hayes has brought conflict to these mountains for too long. His greed, his hatred, these are poisons that must be cleansed." "You mean River will kill him?" Eliza translated, a complex mix of emotions stirring within her. Justice takes many forms, Grey Wolf replied. What matters is that Hayes can never again threaten our people, or you. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Twice, deputies emerged from the settlement and fled into the forest, clearly abandoning their employer. No sign of River or Morning Star appeared. When the first flames became visible in the main dwelling, Eliza's heart seemed to stop. The fire spread with frightening speed, engulfing the structure where she had last seen River, Hayes, and Morning Star. "No," she whispered, starting forward only to be restrained by Grey Wolf's firm grip. "Wait," he cautioned, his eyes fixed on the burning building. As if in answer to an unspoken prayer, a figure burst through the doorway, half carrying another. Even from a distance, Eliza recognized River, supporting the limping form of Morning Star. They staggered away from the flames, collapsing a safe distance from the burning structure. Grey Wolf released Eliza, and she ran to them, heedless of any remaining danger. River looked up as she approached, his face streaked with soot and blood, but alive, wonderfully, miraculously alive. "Hayes?" Grey Wolf asked, joining them more cautiously. River shook his head. Still inside, the roof collapsed. His voice was raw from smoke, but his meaning was clear. Sheriff Nathaniel Hayes would threaten no one ever again. Morning Star coughed violently, and Eliza noticed the severity of her injuries for the first time. A deep cut ran along her arm, and her ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle. "We need to treat her wounds," Eliza said, tearing a strip from her already damaged skirt to create a bandage. "Not here," River replied, forcing himself to his feet. "It's not safe. Hayes's remaining men could regroup." "The high caves," Grey Wolf agreed. "We can tend to her there and reunite with the others." Together they fashioned a crude stretcher from branches and blankets salvaged from an undamaged dwelling. As they worked, the remaining structures of the settlement caught fire, the heat driving them farther back into the trees. Whether the fires were spreading naturally or had been set deliberately by Hayes's departing men was unclear, but the result was the same. The hidden Cherokee village that had stood for generations was being reduced to ashes before their eyes. "Everything we built," Morning Star murmured, watching the destruction through pain-glazed eyes. Grey Wolf placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Buildings can be rebuilt. Lives cannot be returned. We survived. That is what matters." They departed as the sun began to set, casting a reddish glow over the smoking ruins. River and Grey Wolf carried Morning Star's stretcher, while Eliza led the way along the path River indicated, heading higher into the mountains toward the refuge of the caves. The climb was arduous, made more difficult by the need to move carefully with their injured companion. Night fell before they were halfway to their destination, forcing them to travel by the pale light of a quarter moon. Eliza's body ached with exhaustion, her hands raw from scrambling over rocks, but she pressed on without complaint, drawing strength from River's unwavering determination. "Just ahead," River finally announced as they crested a steep ridge. "The waterfall marks the entrance to the hidden valley where the caves lie." The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached, and soon Eliza could make out the silvery gleam of a waterfall cascading down a rocky face. River led them not toward the base of the falls, but to a narrow path that wound behind it, partially concealed by the curtain of water. Passing through this liquid veil, they emerged into a sheltered valley entirely hidden from the outside world. The moonlight revealed a series of cave entrances in the cliff face opposite the waterfall, with small fires burning at several of them. Figures moved in the firelight, and as they were spotted, several people rushed to meet them. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the hidden community. Willing hands took charge of Morning Star, carrying her to one of the larger caves where an elderly woman waited with healing supplies. Others brought food and water, blankets and dry clothing, welcoming the newcomers with solemn dignity despite the tragedy that had befallen their settlement. Eliza found herself in a small cave, warm with the heat of a carefully tended fire. She had been given a clean dress of soft deerskin, and her injuries, minor compared to Morning Star's, had been treated with gentle efficiency by a Cherokee healer. Now she sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames dance while trying to process everything that had happened. Sheriff Hayes was dead. The man who had terrorized Pine Ridge, who had threatened her and her father, who had murdered River's grandfather and attacked the Cherokee settlement in his relentless pursuit of gold, that man would never harm anyone again. She should feel relief, perhaps even satisfaction, yet her emotions were too tangled to name. "May I join you?" River's voice came from the cave entrance, where he stood holding a wooden cup of something steaming. Eliza nodded, shifting to make room for him beside the fire. She noticed he had cleaned the blood and soot from his face and changed into fresh clothing, though a bandage wrapped his forearm where he had been injured during the confrontation with Hayes. "How is Morning Star?" she asked as he sat beside her. "She will recover," River replied, offering her the cup. "Tea. It will help with the pain and exhaustion." Eliza accepted it gratefully, sipping the warm liquid that tasted of herbs and honey. "And the others, those who fled the settlement before we arrived?" "All safe. The children are settled in the larger caves with the elders. The warriors are standing guard, though I doubt any of Hayes's men will find this place, much less attempt to attack it." They sat in silence for a time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant murmur of voices from other caves. It was a companionable quiet, comfortable in a way Eliza would not have thought possible with a man she had known for such a short time. "What happens now?" she finally asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since they left the burning settlement. River gazed into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "My people will stay here until we can determine if it's safe to rebuild. Some may choose to join the Cherokee who went west rather than remain in these mountains. And you?" Eliza's heart beat faster as she awaited his answer. River's eyes met hers, dark and serious in the firelight. "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" "On whether you wish to return to Pine Ridge." The question caught her by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Of course she would need to consider returning home, to her father, to the life she had known. Yet the thought filled her with unease. "Hayes is gone," River continued when she didn't immediately respond. "Without him, Pine Ridge might become a different place. Your father is there, your home." "And if I don't want to return?" Eliza asked, the words emerging before she had fully formed the thought. River's expression softened. "Then there are choices to be made, such as, you could remain with my people for a time, learn our ways, or—" he hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Or we could start anew, somewhere neither of us is bound by the past." The implication was clear, and Eliza felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through her chest. This man, who had risked everything to help her escape, Hayes, was offering her a future with him if she wanted it. "I barely know you," she said, though there was no conviction in the words. River smiled, a rare expression that transformed his solemn features. "You know enough. You've seen me at my most desperate, my most determined, and I have seen the same in you." He was right, Eliza realized. In the span of 2 days, they had faced death together, had relied on each other in ways that revealed character more clearly than years of casual acquaintance might have done. She knew River's courage, his loyalty to his people, his capacity for both tenderness and fierce protection, and he had seen her grow from a woman fleeing in fear to one willing to stand and fight for what was right. "I would need to let my father know I'm safe," she said slowly. "To explain." River nodded. We could send word, or when it's safe, you could tell him yourself. And then? And then, River said, reaching tentatively to take her hand, we decide, together. Eliza looked down at their joined hands, her pale fingers intertwined with his darker ones. In Pine Ridge, such a sight would have caused scandal, condemnation. Yet here, in this moment, it felt right in a way nothing in her previous life ever had. Together, she agreed softly, meeting his gaze with newfound certainty. Outside the cave, the waterfall continued its endless journey from mountain to valley. Within, by the warm light of the fire, two people from different worlds contemplated a future neither had imagined possible just days before. The path ahead would not be easy. Prejudice, cultural differences, and the lingering effects of Hayes' tyranny would all present challenges. But in this moment of quiet connection, those obstacles seemed surmountable. Eliza Morgan had fled Pine Ridge to escape a forced marriage to a cruel man. She had found not only freedom, but the possibility of a bond based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Whatever came next, she would face it not as the frightened young woman who had run into the storm, but as someone who had discovered her own strength and someone who was no longer alone. Dawn broke over the hidden valley, painting the waterfall in hues of gold and rose. Eliza stood at the entrance of the cave, watching the day emerge with a sense of wonder that transcended her exhaustion. The events of yesterday seemed almost dreamlike in the gentle morning light, the desperate battle at the settlement, Hayes' fiery end, their nighttime journey to this secret refuge. Beautiful, isn't it? Grey Wolf's voice startled her from her reverie. The elder Cherokee had approached silently, his movements belying his age and the injuries he had sustained. It's like another world, Eliza admitted, gesturing to the sheltered valley with its cascading water and verdant growth. That is why our ancestors chose this place, Grey Wolf explained, his voice carrying the weight of generations. When the white settlers first came to these mountains, our people needed somewhere they could preserve our ways, our stories. This valley became our sanctuary. And now it's your home again, Eliza observed, thinking of the burning settlement they had fled. Grey Wolf's weathered face revealed nothing of his feelings. Home is not walls and roofs, but people and memories. We carry those with us, always. The philosophical response reminded Eliza of River, who shared the elders' calm acceptance of hardship. She wondered if this resilience was unique to these individuals, or if it was woven into the very fabric of Cherokee culture. This ability to face displacement and violence without surrendering to bitterness. The council will meet this morning, Grey Wolf continued, to decide our path forward. River has asked that you be permitted to attend. Surprise coursed through Eliza. Is that unusual? For an outsider, yes. Grey Wolf studied her with eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. But you are no ordinary outsider. You stood with us against Hayes. You risked your life for our people. I was protecting myself as much as anyone, Eliza demurred, uncomfortable with praise she felt she didn't deserve. Grey Wolf's smile was brief but genuine. Few acknowledge the truth so readily. Perhaps that is why River speaks for you. He gestured toward a larger cave across the valley where people were beginning to gather. Come, the others are waiting. The council meeting took place in a cavern whose entrance was partially concealed by a curtain of hanging vines. Inside, the space opened surprisingly wide, its ceiling high enough that the smoke from the central fire found its way out through natural vents in the rock. Around this fire sat the elders of the community, men and women of varying ages, their faces marked by the wisdom and hardship that came with protecting their people in an increasingly hostile world. River stood as Eliza entered with Grey Wolf, his eyes finding hers across the fire. He had been speaking, apparently presenting some proposal to the gathered council, but paused as they approached. Grey Wolf led Eliza to an empty space in the circle, then took his own place among the elders. An elderly woman adorned with intricate beadwork spoke first, her English heavily accented but clear. "We welcome Eliza Morgan to our council. River has told us of your courage in facing the man called Hayes." Eliza bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm honored by your trust." A murmur of approval ran through the gathered elders. The woman continued, "I am Spotted Fawn, keeper of our stories. This council must decide where our future lies now that our settlement is lost. Already, different paths appear before us." River resumed his position, standing tall in the firelight. The immediate danger has passed with Hayes's death, but his actions were not those of a rogue sheriff acting alone. He spoke of the confederacy, of resources to regain what was lost. There were powerful men behind him, men who will wonder what happened when he doesn't return. An older man with a military bearing interjected, "The gold is a poison. It has brought nothing but death since the Confederate officer hid it in these mountains." "And yet," countered another elder, "in the right hands, it could provide for our people, buy land where we could live without fear, perhaps even rejoin those who were forced west." The discussion continued, flowing between English and Cherokee as the council debated their options. Eliza listened carefully, slowly understanding the complexity of their situation. The settlement's destruction was not merely a loss of homes, but a critical blow to a community already pushed to the margins. Some advocated for rebuilding in an even more remote location, others for using the gold, if it could indeed be found, to start anew elsewhere, away from the reach of men like Hayes. Throughout the discussion, River remained standing, patient and respectful, yet clearly waiting for his moment to speak. When a lull finally came, he stepped forward. "The path forward is clear," he said, his voice resonating in the cave. "We must recover the gold before others come seeking it. Not to use, as Spotted Fawn suggests, though I understand her wisdom, but to remove it as a source of conflict. As long as the gold remains hidden in these mountains, greedy men will come searching for it, threatening our people." Grey Wolf nodded, slowly. "And how do you propose to find what has remained hidden for over a decade?" "With this," River said, reaching into his shirt to withdraw a small object wrapped in deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a weathered piece of paper, the map fragment he had shown Eliza in his cabin. "My grandfather entrusted this to me before his death," River explained. "It is one of 3 pieces. The second was in Hayes's possession. I recovered it from him yesterday before the fire consumed the building." This revelation caused a stir among the council members. One of the younger elders leaned forward eagerly. "And the third piece?" "It was never in these mountains," River replied. "It remains with the last living officer who served under the Confederate paymaster who hid the gold, a man named Colonel William Barrett, who now lives in Knoxville." Eliza couldn't contain her surprise. "You know where the third piece is? Why haven't you sought it before?" All eyes turned to her, and she immediately regretted her outburst. But River didn't seem bothered by her question. "Because until yesterday, I had no way to reach Barrett," he explained. "He is protected, surrounded by former Confederate soldiers still loyal to the cause. No Cherokee could approach him and live." Understanding dawned on Eliza. "But I could," she said softly. River nodded. "A white woman, especially one with a legitimate reason to be in Knoxville, might succeed where I would certainly fail." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. River was proposing that Eliza help them recover the final map piece, using her status as a white woman to access places barred to the Cherokee. Spotted Fawn fixed Eliza with a penetrating gaze. "You are not bound to our struggle, child. You have already done more than could be expected. This is a dangerous path, River suggests. I understand the danger, Eliza replied, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. But Sheriff Hayes brought me into this conflict when he tried to force me to marry him. I have as much interest in seeing this resolved as any of you. Her words were met with approving nods from several council members. Grey Wolf, however, remained thoughtful. There is wisdom in River's plan, but also great risk. If Hayes had powerful allies, they will be watching for any sign of those who opposed him. Which is why we must act quickly, River insisted, before word of Hayes's death reaches Knoxville, before his allies can organize a response. The council deliberated further, weighing options and risks. Eventually, a consensus emerged. River and Eliza would travel to Knoxville to attempt to secure the third map piece from Colonel Barrett. Meanwhile, the community would remain hidden in the valley, recovering from their wounds and preparing for a possible move to a new location. As the council dispersed, Eliza found herself both exhilarated and apprehensive. She had committed to a course of action that would take her far from the familiar confines of Pine Ridge, into a city she had never visited, to confront a man who might well be as dangerous as Hayes had been. River approached her as the elders filed out of the cave. "Thank you," he said simply. "I wouldn't have asked this of you if there were any other way." "You didn't ask," Eliza pointed out. "I offered." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So you did." He gestured toward the cave entrance. "Come, we should prepare if we're to leave by midday." Outside, the valley was alive with activity. Children played near the base of the waterfall, under the watchful eyes of elders, while others tended to cooking fires or sorted through supplies salvaged from the settlement. Despite the traumatic events of the previous day, there was a sense of quiet determination in the air, a refusal to surrender to despair. Eliza followed River to a smaller cave where Morning Star lay recovering from her injuries. The Cherokee woman was awake, her dark eyes alert despite the pain that tightened her features. "The council has agreed," River told Morning Star without preamble. "Eliza and I will journey to Knoxville." Morning Star's gaze shifted to Eliza, assessing. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she remarked. "Perhaps both." "I've been thinking the same thing," Eliza admitted, earning a small smile from the injured woman. "You'll need a story," Morning Star said, pushing herself up despite the obvious pain it caused her. "A reason for your presence in Knoxville that won't arouse suspicion." River nodded. "I've been considering that. Eliza could pose as a young widow seeking to sell goods from her late husband's store. It would explain her traveling alone and give her reason to seek out businessmen like Barrett." "And you?" Eliza asked. "How will we explain your presence?" "I won't be with you in the city," River replied. "At least, not openly. A Cherokee man accompanying a white woman would draw too much attention. I'll guide you to Knoxville and remain outside the city while you make contact with Barrett." The plan made practical sense, but Eliza couldn't help feeling a twinge of anxiety at the thought of facing Barrett alone. Her expression must have betrayed her concerns, for Morning Star reached out to grasp her hand. "Fear is natural," the Cherokee woman said. "But remember what you accomplished yesterday. You stood against Hayes, faced his cruelty and survived. You're stronger than you know." The simple affirmation, coming from a woman who had initially regarded her with suspicion, touched Eliza deeply. "Thank you," she said, squeezing Morning Star's hand gently before releasing it. River outlined the rest of the plan as Morning Star listened attentively. They would take the horse and what supplies could be spared, traveling east toward Knoxville. The journey would take 3 days if the weather held. Longer if the spring rains returned. Once near the city, River would find a secure place to wait while Eliza sought an audience with Colonel Barrett. "There's something else you should know," Morningstar said when River had finished. Barrett was more than just an officer who served. With the paymaster, he was Hayes's connection to whatever remains of the Confederate power structure. If anyone knows who was backing Hayes, it's Barrett. This information added another layer of danger to their mission. If Barrett had been Hayes's ally, he might already be suspicious of any stranger arriving in Knoxville so soon after the sheriff's disappearance. "How do you know this?" Eliza asked. Morningstar's expression darkened. "I was captured by Hayes's men 6 months ago before I escaped. I overheard Hayes speaking with his deputy about communications from Barrett, plans involving the gold. They didn't speak freely in front of their prisoner, but I gathered enough to understand the connection." River's face showed concern. "You never mentioned this." "There was no need until now," Morningstar replied with a slight shrug that caused her to wince. "Besides, I was more focused on staying alive than gathering intelligence." The conversation was interrupted by Grey Wolf's arrival. The elder brought with him clothing suitable for Eliza's journey, a simple but well-made dress in the style worn by white settler women, along with a shawl and sturdy boots. "These belong to a friend," he explained, offering them to Eliza. "A white woman who lived among us for many years, teaching our children the English ways while learning our language in return. She would be pleased to know they serve a purpose once more." Eliza accepted the gifts with heartfelt thanks. The dress was plainer than what she might have worn in Pine Ridge, but its quality and practicality were evident. It would help her blend in during their journey and in Knoxville without drawing undue attention. "There is one more thing," Grey Wolf added, reaching into a pouch at his belt. He withdrew a small object, a simple gold band, a wedding ring to support your story as a widow. It too belonged to our friend. The sight of the ring gave Eliza pause. Wearing it meant fully embracing the deception they were planning, committing herself to a false identity for the duration of their mission. Yet she recognized the necessity, and after a moment's hesitation, slipped the band onto her finger. "A perfect fit," Morningstar observed with a hint of satisfaction. "Perhaps it was meant for you all along." While Eliza changed into her new attire, River gathered the supplies they would need for the journey. By midday, they were ready to depart. The entire community gathered at the valley entrance to bid them farewell, an honor that emphasized the importance of their mission. Spotted Fawn approached them last, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "May the spirits of our ancestors guide your steps," she said solemnly. "Return to us with the map, but more importantly, return with your lives. No treasure is worth the blood of our people." With these words of caution echoing in their minds, River and Eliza set out. The path that led from the hidden valley was treacherous, requiring them to navigate narrow ledges and steep descents. River went first, leading the horse, while Eliza followed carefully in his footsteps. By late afternoon, they had left the most difficult terrain behind and were making good progress along a little-used trail that wound through the forest. River set a brisk pace, clearly hoping to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. Eliza matched his stride without complaint, though her muscles protested after days of unaccustomed exertion. As the shadows lengthened, River finally called a halt in a small clearing beside a stream. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, helping Eliza dismount. "There's good water, and the trees will shelter us if the weather turns." Together, they established a simple camp. River built a small, nearly smokeless fire, while Eliza arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. They worked in comfortable silence, each anticipating the other's needs with a synchronicity that felt surprisingly natural. Over a spare meal of dried meat and corn cakes provided by the Cherokee, they discussed the details of their plan for Knoxville. Eliza would present herself as Elizabeth Mason, recently widowed and journeying to sell her late husband's merchandise. The story was close enough to her real circumstances to be convincing. Her father's store in Pine Ridge did indeed have goods to sell, and she was familiar enough with the business to speak knowledgeably about it. "How will I find Colonel Barrett?" she asked, accepting the cup of herbal tea River offered. "He owns a large mercantile in the center of town," River explained. "Barrett and Sons. He's well known in Knoxville, respected despite, or perhaps because, of his Confederate past. And once I find him, how do I convince him to show me the map?" River's expression grew serious. "That will be the most difficult part. Barrett has no reason to trust a stranger, especially with something as valuable as the map fragment." He hesitated, then reached into his shirt, withdrawing the medallion he had shown her in his cabin, his grandfather's medallion that had been taken by Hayes. "This may help. Show it to Barrett. Tell him you recovered it from Hayes's effects after his death. It's proof that you were connected to Hayes, which might intrigue Barrett enough to speak with you." Eliza took the medallion, turning it over in her hands. The golden disc was inscribed with Cherokee symbols, its surface worn from generations of handling. "Won't he wonder how I came to have this? How I knew of his connection to Hayes? Tell him that Hayes spoke of him before his death, that the sheriff entrusted you with a message for Barrett alone. Men like Barrett are often arrogant enough to believe that their reputation extends far beyond its actual reach. He'll be curious, if nothing else." The plan seemed tenuous at best, relying heavily on Barrett's curiosity overcoming his caution. But they had few alternatives, and time was not on their side. If Hayes's allies realized what had happened at the Cherokee settlement, they might move the map fragment or place it under heavier guard. As night fell completely, River banked the fire to provide warmth without a telltale glow that might attract unwanted attention. The forest around them came alive with nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant song of spring peepers near the stream. Eliza lay on her bedroll, staring up at the patches of star-filled sky visible through the canopy of trees. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the past days replayed in her mind. Her flight from Pine Ridge, the battle at the settlement, the council's decision to send them on this mission. All of it seemed surreal, as if she had stumbled into someone else's life. "You should rest," River's voice came softly from across the fire. "The journey tomorrow will be long." "I know," Eliza replied, turning to face him. The dying embers cast his features in an amber glow, highlighting the strong lines of his face. "But my mind won't quiet." River nodded in understanding. "That is natural after what you've experienced. Death, battle, decisions that will shape your future. These are not small things." "When does it get easier?" she asked, the question more vulnerable than she had intended. "It doesn't," River admitted, "but you grow stronger, more certain of your path." He paused, adding kindling to the fire to revive its warmth. "My grandfather told me that a life without challenges is like a blade never tested in battle. It may be beautiful, but its true strength remains unknown, even to itself." The philosophy resonated with Eliza. Her life in Pine Ridge had been constrained, predictable, until Hayes's ultimatum had forced her to discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was," River agreed, a note of loss coloring his voice. "He taught me to walk between worlds, to understand the white man's ways without forgetting my own people's wisdom. Without his teachings, I might have become bitter, consumed by hatred for those who drove us from our ancestral lands." "Yet you don't hate," Eliza observed. "Even Hayes, you fought him because you had to, not out of vengeance." River considered this. "Hatred is a fire that burns the one who carries it more than those it's directed against. My grandfather understood this. He taught me to oppose injustice without allowing it to poison my spirit. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence. Eliza found her eyelids growing heavy, the rhythmic sounds of the forest lulling her towards sleep. Just before she drifted off, she heard River speaking softly in Cherokee, a prayer perhaps, or a song. The unfamiliar words washed over her like a blessing, carrying her into dreams more peaceful than she had any right to expect. Morning came with a fine mist that clung to the trees, transforming the forest into a realm of shadow and silver light. Eliza woke to find River already up, tending to the horse and preparing a simple breakfast of dried berries and the last of the corn cakes. "The weather favors us," he said by way of greeting. "The mist will burn off by mid-morning, but it covers our trail for now." They ate quickly and broke camp with the efficiency of those who know time is precious. As River had predicted, the mist began to dissipate as the sun climbed higher, revealing a day of clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect for travel. The trail they followed gradually widened, showing more frequent signs of use. Twice they had to leave the path and conceal themselves in the underbrush as other travelers passed by. First, a pair of hunters, then a family in a wagon headed toward one of the larger settlements east of Pine Ridge. "We're approaching more populated areas," River explained after the second encounter. "From here on, we'll need to be more cautious. My presence will draw attention you don't need." They began to travel more during the evening and early morning, hours resting during the day in secluded spots away from the main trails. River taught Eliza to move quietly through the forest, to spot signs of recent passage, and to identify plants that could be eaten or used for medicine. She proved an apt pupil, her natural intelligence complemented by a determination that impressed even River. On the afternoon of the second day, they reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley beyond. In the distance, the sprawl of Knoxville was visible, a substantial town of several thousand people with church spires and substantial buildings marking its center. "We'll reach the outskirts by tomorrow noon," River said, studying the landscape with a practiced eye. "There's a wooded area here." He pointed to a spot east of the town where I can make camp while you enter the city. Eliza nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of apprehension in her stomach. The prospect of entering Knoxville alone, of confronting Colonel Barrett with their flimsy plan, seemed far more daunting now that the city was actually in sight. "What if I fail?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. River turned to her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Then you return to me, and we find another way. This isn't your burden alone, Eliza." His reassurance steadied her, as did the simple fact that he had used her given name, something he did rarely, usually addressing her with a nod or simply meeting her eyes when he needed her attention. The sound of it in his voice created a warmth that lingered even as they descended from the ridge and continued their journey. That night, they camped in a hollow near a small tributary of the Tennessee River. The proximity to Knoxville necessitated extra caution, and River built no fire despite the chill that descended with the darkness. Instead, they shared the last of their food wrapped in blankets, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tell me about your life before," River said unexpectedly. "In Pine Ridge, before Hayes forced you to flee." The request surprised Eliza, but she found herself wanting to share these pieces of herself with him. "It was ordinary, I suppose. I helped my father in the store, attended church on Sundays, visited with the few friends I had. After my mother died during the war, I took over running our household as well." She paused, reflecting. "It wasn't an unhappy life, just a limited one. I always felt there should be more, though I couldn't have said what that more might be." "And now?" River asked. "Now that you've seen beyond Pine Ridge?" Eliza considered the question carefully. Now I know there is more. Different ways of living, of thinking, different kinds of courage and strength. She looked at him directly. I can't go back to not knowing these things, even if I wanted to. Some knowledge changes us forever, River agreed. Like water carving stone. Once the path is made, it cannot be unmade. A comfortable silence fell between them. Eliza found herself studying River's profile in the dim starlight, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. He was unlike any man she had known in Pine Ridge, carrying a certainty about who he was that had nothing to do with the approval of others. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After we recover the map and find the gold, where will you go?" The question seemed to catch River off guard. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "For so long, my purpose has been protecting my people, avenging my grandfather. I've given little thought to what comes after." "Perhaps you should," Eliza suggested gently. "There will be an after." River turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "And what of you? Will you return to Pine Ridge, to your father?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Eliza felt the weight of it, the recognition that her answer would define not just her own future, but possibly River's as well. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I need to ensure my father is safe, to explain why I left. But beyond that," she trailed off, unable to articulate the swirl of possibilities that had opened before her. "I think I'm still discovering who I am when I'm not defined by Pine Ridge, by what others expect of me." River nodded, understanding in his expression. "That is a worthy journey in itself." They fell silent again, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The night deepened around them, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the dangerous game of deception they planned to play in Knoxville. But for this moment, in this sheltered hollow beside the quietly flowing stream, they had found a measure of peace in each other's company. And for Eliza, that unexpected connection, forged in danger, strengthened by shared purpose, was perhaps the most surprising discovery of all. Knoxville bustled with activity, the streets crowded with merchants, farmers, and tradespeople going about their business. Eliza moved through this throng with measured steps, conscious of maintaining the demeanor of a respectable widow. The simple dress provided by Grey Wolf suited her role perfectly, neither too fine to raise questions nor too poor to invite dismissal. She had parted from River at dawn. He remained hidden in the wooded area east of town, where he would wait 3 days for her return. If she failed to appear by then, he would assume the worst and retreat to the Cherokee settlement with news of her capture or worse. Barrett & Sons Mercantile stood at the intersection of 2 main streets, its imposing brick facade and large display windows advertising its owner's prosperity. Eliza paused across the street, gathering her courage while observing the establishment. Men in business attire entered and exited, while clerks could be seen attending to customers inside. Taking a deep breath, Eliza crossed the street and pushed open the heavy wooden door. A bell chimed softly, announcing her arrival. The interior was impressive: polished wooden counters, shelves stocked with goods from floor to ceiling, and a second level accessible by an ornate staircase. The air smelled of tobacco, leather, and coffee. A young clerk approached, his manner polite but evaluating. "May I help you, ma'am?" "I wish to speak with Colonel Barrett," Eliza replied, keeping her voice steady. "On a matter of business." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. "The colonel is quite busy. Perhaps one of our managers could assist you?" "My business is with Colonel Barrett specifically," Eliza insisted. "Please inform him that Mrs. Elizabeth Mason wishes to discuss a matter relating to Sheriff Hayes of Pine Ridge." The mention of Hayes had the intended effect. The clerk's expression shifted from dismissive to cautious. "1 moment, please," He disappeared up the staircase, leaving Eliza standing alone. Several customers glanced her way with mild curiosity before returning to their transactions. Eliza forced herself to breathe normally, to project the confident appearance of a woman with legitimate business, rather than someone perpetrating a dangerous deception. After what seemed an eternity, the clerk returned, his manner noticeably more deferential. "The colonel will see you. Please follow me." Eliza was led up the staircase to a corridor with several doors. The clerk knocked at the furthest one, opened it upon hearing a response from within, and ushered her inside. Colonel William Barrett stood behind a massive desk, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian attire. He was older than Eliza had expected, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, however, were sharp and calculating as they assessed her. "Mrs. Mason," he said, not offering his hand, "I understand you have business concerning Sheriff Hayes." "Thank you for seeing me, Colonel," Eliza replied, employing the quiet dignity she had observed in Morningstar. "I've come from Pine Ridge with news that could not be entrusted to paper." Barrett gestured to a chair before his desk. "Please, sit. My clerk mentioned Sheriff Hayes. Has something happened?" Eliza seated herself, arranging her skirts with deliberate care to disguise the trembling in her hands. "I regret to inform you that Sheriff Hayes is dead. His body was recovered from a fire at a Cherokee settlement in the mountains 3 days ago." Barrett's face remained impassive, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. "I see. And you know this how, exactly?" "I was there," Eliza replied simply. "The sheriff had been pursuing me after I declined his marriage proposal. I fled into the mountains, where I encountered Cherokee survivors of his attack on their settlement." She withdrew River's medallion from her pocket, placing it on the desk between them. "This was recovered from the sheriff's possessions. I believe it holds significance beyond its obvious value." Barrett did not touch the medallion, but his gaze fixed on it with unmistakable recognition. "You take a significant risk coming here with this story, Mrs. Mason, if that is indeed your name." "Risk has become familiar these past days," Eliza responded, meeting his gaze steadily. "Sheriff Hayes spoke of you before his death. He mentioned a shared interest, an interest that cost the lives of several Cherokee elders." Barrett leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Be very careful with your next words, madam. Accusations of impropriety can damage reputations, including your own." "I make no accusations," Eliza assured him, though her heart raced at the implied threat. "I merely convey information. Hayes believed you possessed something that, combined with items in his possession, would lead to a significant discovery. I've come to discuss terms for an exchange." "Terms?" Barrett's tone was coldly amused. "You have nothing I want, Mrs. Mason." Eliza leaned forward slightly. "I have the 2 map fragments Hayes recovered, one from his office in Pine Ridge, the other from his person after the fire. This claim, part truth, part fabrication, brought the first genuine reaction from Barrett. His eyes widened fractionally, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. "Hayes told me everything," Eliza continued, emboldened by his response. "About the Confederate gold, about the divided map, about your plans once it was recovered. He trusted me." This last statement was delivered with a hint of suggestion that made Barrett's eyes narrow. "Hayes trusted no one," Barrett countered, but doubt had crept into his voice. "He trusted those who shared his vision," Eliza replied, "of resources reclaimed, of influence restored. I may not be a Confederate officer, Colonel, but I understand the value of having powerful friends." Barrett studied her for a long moment, reassessing. Eliza forced herself to remain still under his scrutiny, though every instinct urged her to flee. "If what you say is true," he finally said, "then you understand the significance of what's at stake. It's not merely gold, but the future of a cause many believe is merely dormant, not defeated." "I understand perfectly," Eliza assured him, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite her horror at the confirmation of River's suspicions. Hayes had indeed been part of something larger, Confederate sympathizers still working to resurrect their lost cause. Barrett rose and moved to a painting on the wall, a dignified portrait of himself in Confederate uniform. He swung the frame aside, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. After entering the combination, he withdrew a weathered leather pouch. "Hayes was a crude instrument," Barrett remarked as he returned to his desk. "Effective, but lacking subtlety. I had concerns about his methods, though not his loyalty." He fixed Eliza with a penetrating stare. "I find it curious that he would confide in a woman, particularly one who rejected his proposal of marriage." The moment had come for Eliza's most dangerous lie. The proposal was a public formality. Our private arrangement was more pragmatic. Hayes needed a respectable wife to solidify his position in Pine Ridge. I needed protection after my husband's death left me vulnerable. The gold was to be our security, allowing us to leave that backwater town once it was recovered. Barrett seemed to weigh this explanation, seeking inconsistencies. Finding none obvious enough to challenge, he opened the pouch and extracted a folded paper yellowed with age. "This is what Hayes sought," he said, not yet showing her its contents. 1/3 of a map leading to gold that could fund a renewal of our righteous cause. "Before I show you this, Mrs. Mason, I require proof that you possess the other fragments." Eliza had anticipated this demand. From her reticule, she withdrew a folded paper similar to Barrett's, the authentic fragment River had entrusted to her. "I carry only one piece with me," she explained. "The other remains secured. Insurance, you understand." Barrett nodded, accepting this caution as reasonable. He placed his fragment on the desk, motioning for Eliza to do the same. She complied, positioning River's fragment near Barrett's, but not touching it, close enough to suggest they might align, yet not so close that Barrett could seize both. "Where is the third piece?" Barrett asked, his eyes fixed on the partial map. "As I said, secured," Eliza replied. "I propose an arrangement, Colonel. You provide me with a directive to the Pine Ridge Bank, releasing my late husband's assets, which Hayes had frozen. In exchange, I provide the final map fragment and partner with you in recovering the gold." Barrett laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You overestimate your position, Mrs. Mason. I could simply take that fragment from you now and locate the third myself." "You could," Eliza agreed calmly, "but you wouldn't find it. And even if you did, wouldn't you prefer a partner, someone who shared Hayes's vision but possesses the subtlety he lacked?" The implied criticism of his former ally, combined with the suggestion of a more sophisticated partnership, appealed to Barrett's vanity. Eliza could see calculation in his eyes as he weighed the proposal. "You're an intriguing woman, Mrs. Mason," he said finally, "far more so than I would have expected from Pine Ridge. Perhaps there is merit in your suggestion." He refolded his map fragment and returned it to the pouch. "I shall draft the directive you request. Return tomorrow at noon, and we will finalize our arrangement." Eliza carefully recovered her fragment, tucking it away. "Thank you, Colonel. I believe this partnership will prove beneficial to us both." As she rose to leave, Barrett added, "One small detail, Mrs. Mason. You mentioned Cherokee survivors of Hayes's attack. These savages have been a thorn in the side of progress for too long. Any information on their new location would be appreciated." The question confirmed Eliza's worst fears about Barrett's intentions. "I have limited knowledge of their movements," she replied evasively. "They scattered after the fire. Most headed west, I believe, toward the territorial border. Barrett nodded, seemingly satisfied with this misdirection. Until tomorrow, then. Outside the mercantile, Eliza forced herself to walk unhurriedly, maintaining the composed demeanor expected of a respectable widow. Inside, her heart pounded with a mixture of triumph and terror. She had gained Barrett's conditional trust and confirmed the conspiracy behind Hayes's actions. Now, she needed to reach River with this information before Barrett could take action. Eliza made her way to the small boarding house where she had taken a room, maintaining the pretense of a widow. In town on business. Once safely inside, she sat on the narrow bed, her mind racing. Barrett had given her until noon tomorrow, time enough to slip away during the night and reach River with the news. Their plan had been for her to spend at least one night in Knoxville, to avoid suspicion, leaving in the morning if her meeting with Barrett proved unsuccessful. Now, with Barrett expecting her return, they would need to depart immediately after sharing information, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the city before the colonel realized he had been deceived. As dusk fell, Eliza packed her few belongings and settled in to wait for the deepest part of night, when her departure would be least likely to draw attention. She dozed fitfully, waking at every sound from the street below. Shortly after midnight, she slipped from the boarding house, a shawl drawn over her head to obscure her features. The streets of Knoxville were mostly deserted, though light still spilled from a few taverns where late revelers continued their celebrations. Eliza kept to the shadows, making her way toward the eastern edge of town, where River waited. The woods seemed more threatening in darkness than they had in daylight. Eliza followed the landmarks River had identified, straining to see in the minimal moonlight filtering through the trees. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf amplified her anxiety. "River?" she called softly when she reached the designated meeting place, a clearing beside a lightning-struck oak. "It's Eliza." A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness, beneath the trees, resolving into River's familiar form. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him, safe and waiting as promised. "You succeeded?" he asked, moving swiftly to her side. "Yes and no," Eliza replied, quickly relating her meeting with Barrett and the arrangement to return tomorrow. He confirmed everything: the Confederate sympathizers, the plans for the gold. He even asked about the new location of your people. River's expression darkened. "Then we must move quickly. Barrett will not wait long before verifying your story. When you fail to appear tomorrow, he'll send men after you and possibly to search the mountains again." They gathered their meager belongings and mounted the horse, with River guiding them away from Knoxville, along a path different from the one they had used to approach the city. They rode through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest. The horse. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Knoxville. River finally called a halt near a small stream, allowing them both to rest briefly and the horse to drink. "We've confirmed what we suspected," River said, as they shared the last of their provisions. "The threat to my people isn't ended with Hayes's death. Barrett and others like him will continue searching for the gold, using it to fuel their cause." "What will you do?" Eliza asked. River was silent for a moment, considering. "We return to the settlement with this information. The council will need to decide, perhaps abandon these mountains entirely, join our people further west, where Barrett's influence can't reach." "And the gold," Eliza pressed. "With all 3 map fragments, you could find it first. Remove the reason for their pursuit." "Perhaps," River agreed, "or perhaps the seeking of it would only bring more violence, more death." He looked at her directly. "What of you, Eliza? Will you return to Pine Ridge now that Hayes is gone?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Eliza realized she'd been avoiding this decision, focusing instead on their immediate mission. I need to check on my father, she said slowly, to explain why I left, to ensure he's safe. But Pine Ridge is no longer home. I don't belong there anymore. Where do you belong? River asked softly. Eliza met his gaze, finding in his dark eyes the same question that echoed in her heart. I'm still discovering that, she admitted. But I know it's not back in that life, confined by others' expectations. River nodded, understanding in his expression. The path forward rarely reveals itself all at once. Sometimes we must take each step as it comes, trusting that the journey itself will show us our destination. As the first light of dawn illuminated his face, Eliza saw in River not just an ally in danger, but a man who had awakened something in her she hadn't known existed. A courage, a certainty of purpose that transcended the limitations of her former life. Whatever comes next, she said, reaching out to take his hand, I don't want to face it alone. River's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. You won't have to, he promised. Together they mounted the horse once more, heading west toward the mountains, toward the hidden valley, toward whatever future awaited them beyond the shadow of the cruel sheriff and the legacy of hatred he had served. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.